Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
All right. Welcome, Professor Steve Fuller and Professor Patrick Linden.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right. So just for the audience, I think, Steve, you're having a delay in 1 second. So this will be part of the conversation in terms of just pausing a little bit and letting the person react. But as I've had you both on this podcast, I think, Steve, I had you 2 or 3 times. Patrick, we had a nice conversation once about your book, The Case Against Death, which I found very interesting, and we'll tackle it. And as you said when we were talking, just the 3 of us, that this is the topic of death, and the topic of radical life extension has many variables. So one can tackle it from many angles, psychologically, economically, politically, and so on and so forth. For this conversation, I'm really interested in one aspect that I find most compelling, or the one that troubles me the most. Doesn't mean that it's the one that troubles everybody the most, but the one that has to do with power, right? And then we can use it as the entry point, and obviously the conversation will go naturally where it may. But in essence, the bottom line for me is this: assume that we do get to a point where we can extend the life of folks, to, I don't know, 100 healthy. You can live up to 100 years in a healthy way, and so forth, and be able to be physically active, cognitively competent, so forth. Sort of, you're young until you die, right? And then let's start with 100, because I think people can understand that, can visualize it, can feel that it's coming, that we can get to that point. I think last time you and I, Patrick, talked about like 300 years old, just to sort of have this extreme position and see if we can navigate it. But let's say 100 years old, a person can get to that point and they are active. The thing that sort of keeps on coming back to me as the one issue that I can't really pin down is, or figure out a way to accept, is the consequences of that for me are very clear, which is we'll have a class of people who are extremely powerful because they have lived a long time, they have accumulated power, very concretely, money, contacts, knowledge, expertise, wisdom, quote unquote, right? And in that case, seeing that the bulk of the ills that we have, at least in Western society, is this vast disparity in wealth distribution. Aren't we going, headlong towards there if we don't start grappling with that issue immediately? And I wanted to sort of get your reactions. I know I'm going to put, again, artificial hats on people and reduce them in their roles. One of them is going to say it's not a big problem. The other one is going to say it is a big problem. And the first one would be Patrick, and the other one is Steve. But obviously, I'm not going to reduce you to those positions. You can obviously feel free to nuance them and so forth. But let's start with just that basic problem proposition. Patrick, how would you answer me or calm me down, given what I have said about my trepidations?
Okay, so your fear is that if we live and are healthy until we are 100, then a lot of the power in society will move towards the older segment of the population.
Yep.
Okay. So I think that might be a possible consequence. But in the big scheme of things, I would say it's a better problem to have than the problem we have today with people becoming aged, sick, suffer, and die earlier than so, right? So that's the big scheme. I don't think the solution to whatever worry we have here is status quo, is that we allow what's happening today to continue to happen. It's a better problem to have to say, how do we deal with this huge, let's say, special interest group or power coalition of the elderly in the future? Another thing I want to say is that the elderly is not necessarily just like one big homogeneous entity, but there are other dynamics in the picture, of course. There are the categories of ethnicity and sex and class and other dimensions that play in. And I mean, today, many think we have a problem with special interests from the military-industrial complex or from big pharma or et cetera. So there's a lot of dynamics going on, and there's a lot of worries that we have today. And if we live longer, maybe this could be a worry. But not to the extent that necessarily it's not something that we can negotiate and work out a solution to. Now, even more optimistically, one could say, well, I would trust my future self to be wiser, perhaps even better. And if I can retain my good health, mentally as well as physically, then I could make good decisions. So it might not be so bad to have a more, wizened a power, So these are some of the answers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, does this calm you down?
No, not really.
Okay.
Because the
Yeah.
the thing that bothers me is the structural, not psychological. Okay, I will be a better self, I'll be wiser and so on, healthier. I'll probably do things that that I'll be able to do because I am in that state, which I've never been, or meaning I'm much older, but still have my capacities. That's fine. But in terms of the power distribution, that feels to me that remains something that we have not looked into as much as we should.
But can I ask you,
Yeah.
what is it that you're afraid that
Mhm.
the older segment is going to do that is so terrible?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me just point to a concrete example, which is the current political landscape in the United States, where I think in all three branches of government, maybe all three branches of government, the people who are in power are the old ones. They are in their late 70s, 80s. Dianne Feinstein is 90 years old and basically collapsing, and still she clings to power. And with that come a lot of negative things, which is old ideas, the status quo, the system that does not want to budge because these folks have interests that are entrenched, ideas that are entrenched, and so on and so forth. And so you see like people are nervous about Biden, right? Okay, not just because he's old, but because he comes with a worldview that dates back from, I don't know, the 80s, right? He sees the United States as being hegemonic, and he sees the world in a way that just has been frozen into the Cold War era, whereas perhaps younger folks might see things differently and therefore have policies that are different and so on. So Steve, what are your thoughts on this? What's your reaction to what you just heard?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, in a way that complicates it a little bit, is the fact that you're only talking about 100 years. And maybe if you talked about it a little bit for a somewhat longer period, let's say 150 years or so,
Yeah,
then in a sense, the issues I mean, at least from the way I understand what you're asking about, become clearer. I think, first of all, one thing that isn't ever quite clear in this kind of discussion is whether we're talking about obliging everyone to live 100 or 150 years or making it discretionary. Right. So in other words, okay, so we have the capacity for doing this, right? So this is granted at the outset. But I do think the way one thinks about the issue has to do with whether it's made compulsory or whether it's discretionary. I've been thinking about that aspect of the issue because it seems to me for a lot of this kind of stuff that we're talking about longevity, it does make a difference. In a way, it's an easier issue to deal with if everyone's forced to do it. Okay, so in other words, if we have the capacity for people to live 150 years, and we basically say you must live 150 years, right? And then in a sense, because it then becomes kind of the same problem for everyone. The problem is if you give people discretion. So because this is kind of, in a way, kind of how I imagine this will actually play out in fact, right? So I'm not especially skeptical about the kind of Aubrey de Grey claims that there's a 50% chance that by whatever 2030, 2040, whatever, right, that we'll be able to significantly extend, human lifespan, right, in the kind of way you're talking about. I'm not skeptical about that. But then I would imagine that this would then be somewhat discretionary at the outset. And we might imagine, let's say, rich people will take advantage of it because it'll be more, expensive at the outset, the kinds of gene therapies that would be involved. And that feeds into the kinds of concerns you have. But let's say that problem is solved.
Yep.
And it's kind of, cheap enough to do. It's kind of,
Yep.
we're able to, industrialize the process in a sense.
Yeah.
And so the per capita costs go down. But that then still leaves a problem. Supposing, let's say, only 20% of the population wants to live to 150, and everybody else wants to live whatever they would normally live. Okay. And then I think you get into then it starts to get a little bit tricky in terms of, managing intergenerational change and, and so forth. Because I think in a way, one of the things that has kept societies kind of regularly reproducing themselves is the idea that people will live within a certain tolerance range, right? And in a way, generational succession is sort of, in terms of how long you hold your job and stuff like that, right? I mean, these things, the social structure really does have a kind of ageism built into it. And if you really then allow for a kind of a great deal of latitude for how long people can live, then that then it does raise some issues, right? I mean, especially in terms of disadvantages for young people. If very healthy old people want to carry on till they're 150, basically, right? In certain kinds of professions, for example, let's say there's academic professions might be one profession where there would be a strong chance of people wanting to carry on forever, right? And then so how would generational succession occur under those circumstances? It might not be true for some other professions. And so I do see the potential here for quite a lot of, I mean, you're putting this primarily in terms of power dynamics in a kind of hierarchical sort of way, but I see a much more kind of, structurally dislocative kind of thing, that there's going to be problems at lots of different levels in terms of societal reproduction that will take place if it's discretionary. Because my guess is that at least at the outset, not everyone's going to want to do this, even if it's available. And in fact, in Patrick's book, for example, in the beginning of the book, he actually makes reference to all these surveys that are done, right? And where people are asked, how long do you want to live, even if you have an option to live longer, right? And people generally want to live normal number of years. And I find this to be true too, because as you may know, I go around talking to high school students about transhumanism, and I ask them about a whole portfolio of transhumanist issues, right? The business of longevity is just one of them, but the students are much more sympathetic to a lot of the other stuff, some of it much more exotic, like uploading consciousness and all the rest of it, than this. This is the one they tend to actually not like very much, in terms of living forever. In fact, it's a hard thing to, I actually have to give them, I actually have to make an argument to them, right? It doesn't have any intuitive appeal at all. So actually, when I'm making the argument to them so they can think about it, some of the points that Patrick raises in his book, I would put to them, right? But it's not a easy sell. So it
Well,
seems to me that even if this is made available in the beginning, right, it'll be a minority uptake, even if it's affordable. And this by itself will start to cause some social dislocation, right? And so that's why, in a way, it would be an easier issue if it was compulsory.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, let's first of all, I think folks react to the notion of, you know, you to 120, 130, because they just think that, okay, this very old person is going to just stick around for a long time, and I don't, you know, so they're against the suffering of, you know, beyond 80 or 90, right? So I think there's that element of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, but I mean, I think as Patrick points out, I think that aspect of the argument has to be removed, right? That in a sense, if we're talking about longevity, right, we're talking about longevity where you're intact, right? Otherwise, there's no point, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the argument is not about, you know, becoming decrepit for a longer period of time.
yeah. But when you talk to people, right, and so I think instinctively they react to it like, I don't want to be 110, you know, and I'm living decrepit. And then you go back to them and you say, listen, imagine that you are X, Y, and Z and you're healthy, and that's very hard to imagine. And so they're like I did that experiment. This is anecdotal totally. With my mom, who's 80, 83, 83, yeah, 84. She's 84, right? And she's very, very vivacious, and she's healthy and everything, right? And so, and I did this over what is this, December, and I had Patrick's book with me. I was reading it, right? And so I you know, I asked her, like, what do you think? And she's a religious person, not overly religious, but she, you know, she thinks that the God exists and so forth, and so on. And I said, okay, imagine you could live another 40 years. And then her reaction was like, I don't think so, right? I think that's weird, right? And so I pushed some more. And I said, what if you're healthy? What if I could restore you to your being 40? What do you think, right? So I got into a back and forth with her, a visceral back and forth where she was able to be honest with me and open and so on, which is a different thing than somebody who's a professor talking to students, or a survey where people are going to give you a first order reaction, maybe a second order reaction, but beyond that, you don't go deep into it, right? You don't force them to imagine and have them think through things and then just pause and imagine it, come back the next. I stayed 2 weeks, so I was able to have this conversation as a running conversation, right? So my point really is, can we really say that, hey, people's reaction is this? You know, because when somebody's healthy, here's the thing that that sort of, for me, makes this a little bit more problematic than for you guys. If somebody's healthy, and they're fulfilled, right, and they're able to do the things that they like to do, and they wake up in the morning, they can drink their coffee, and there's the sun, and there are people that they love, there are books that they read at any given day, you know, they'll say, I want to live a little bit more, right? And so that the notion that somebody would say, I don't want to live 150 years is easy to say just like that. But when somebody is pinned down, do you want to die now that you are 140 and 3 months old, and you can have some more days? Like, not yet, not just yet, right? And so that's what I want to. Therefore,
Is that really? Do you?
yeah,
Okay, maybe there are people who think like that. I mean, I must say, in terms of thinking about, you know, the issue of life and death and how long I want to live, this way of putting it does not resonate with me, I have
yeah,
to
that's
say.
fine. That's fine. No, here's why it resonates with me, because I see people now in their 90s, and even though they are fading, they still want to live another day, right? And part of my I'm a technologist, and I'm
But
setting
that
up.
does feed into Patrick's argument, actually, because Patrick is talking a lot about desire, right? The desire to live as being a very
Exactly, the desire to live. No, hang on. The desire to live, and I'm not challenging that at all. All right. Meaning, I don't. The thing is that do not want to fall into is the fallacy of, what is it, composition, where because everybody wants to live for 120 years or 50 years, it's a good thing for a society as such. So I want to avoid that, and I'm coming to it from the angle not of whether people want to live or not, but okay, assume that voluntarily, instead of I'm challenging the compulsory thing, and I think we can have still a debate with the assumption that, assuming that people do want to live a healthy life, by and large. Patrick, I think that's your argument. People do want to live a healthy life by and large, right? And when they get to a point where they can't have life that they want to have, right, then they they may say it's better for me to fade, right?
Well,
So that's my baseline assumption.
yeah.
Is let's agree, if we can, right, that people do want to live, and I think, otherwise I'll take the rug out of Patrick's argument, right? So I want to keep the rug there, right? People do want to live, and they want to live for a long time. They want to live a healthy life, and so on and so forth. My point or my question is, given that I see today people who are living to their 80s and 90s, people with power, and again, I come from the power perspective, right? Anybody who has power, whether it's in academia, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the industry, right? You can be a CEO and you can be in charge and you can have a wonderful life. And then you can create this sort of monopoly because you know so much, you have so many relationships, you know, processes, that any startup who comes up, no matter how well funded, will not be able to dislodge you. And we are seeing this phenomena right now. We're seeing Amazon has been around for 25 years, right? We see Google, who has been around for quite a while, and I don't see them you know, fading unless they get dismembered by the FTC and so on, right? So the question is, and I see it in politics as well, you know, the examples of Biden and so forth. And also even more perverse is the following, right? These guys, right? Biden and and
Xi
Nancy Pelosi.
Jinping, how about him?
Nancy
The guy in
Pelosi.
China?
No, Nancy Pelosi. And I'm not familiar with the Chinese.
Oh yeah, they're all old guys too.
They're old guys, right? These guys actually, not only are they in power, but they are grooming, if I may use that word, they're grooming the young ones like AOC and Hakeem Jeffries, right? And Adam Schiff, right? These are senators and congressmen, to replicate their
Adam Schiff is my age.
Yeah,
he's not that young.
He's 63. No, what?
Yeah,
exactly, right? That's my point. Well, he is young, actually. He's healthy. You know, he's definitely not going to be decrepit in 10 years, right? He's taking care of himself and so on. AOC, right? AOC has been domesticated. You know, she is now no longer a rebel. She revels in fact that she has some power, right?
But she's still not old enough to run for president.
Not yet. That's true. She has 2 more years to go. Is that right? 35.
That's right. She's being hot-housed, right? Incubated. Yeah.
Yeah, she has Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is just a clone of Biden, except I don't know, 10, 20 years younger, right?
20,
so you have
years.
These folks who are not only in power, but they have enough time. Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, like the whip, the head.
How about Dianne Feinstein of California?
Dianne Feinstein,
she's
right?
90.
She's 90. You know, and they're holding her seat because they want Adam Schiff to take it. All right. So, you know, they don't want the governor to appoint the Barbara Lee, who is definitely on the left. So there's a whole thing going on there. My point is, you have these people who are in power, right? They will stay in power and they'll have enough time to get their clones, younger clones, who replicate their worldview, right? And that bothers me. And so my question to you is, am I just thinking about this wrongly, or do I have something that's interesting? I'm gonna stop talking.
Well, I mean, this does go to a kind of a point that actually Patrick does talk about in his book, because I was kind of curious about how he deals with this issue about generational succession, basically, right? And in a sense, where do the new ideas come from, right? Now, what you're presenting, Ahmed, is actually a story that's not just about politics, but also applies in a certain kind of, at least a certain traditional kind of academia, where the successors to chairs are being groomed. And in fact, I have to say, you know, to go back to this book of mine that I've recently published on the future of the university. One of the great innovations, and this might be something Patrick might find kind of interesting in a way, that in Bismarck's Germany, there was a great deal of concern about intergenerational reproduction of certain lines of thinking and so forth in the consolidated German university system once Bismarck took over. And so his higher education minister, a guy named Althoff, actually stopped that by basically preventing universities, as it were, from setting up their own committees to figure out who the successors to the chairs were. And everything was centrally done from Berlin. And the idea was that Althoff would try to break the possibility of dynasties existing in various universities. And essentially what he did was he cross-pollinated the universities, right? So people who graduated from one place would pick up a chair somewhere else, and there wouldn't be this kind of intergenerational succession. And this would be the way of, keep making sure there were always new ideas in the mix. And it actually was very successful, actually, in terms of making Germany this kind of great place of scientific innovation in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So there was a concern there that if there is this kind of very steady intergenerational flow, right, where the professor's kind of in power until he's got his people sorted out and he figure out who's the appropriate successor, kind of like what Ahmed's saying about American politics, right, and that this ends up ossifying the system, basically, and what you need is some kind of break. Right now, obviously, one way of you can break this, you could kind of break this kind of pattern in lots of different ways. One of them would be to actually have terminal dates for the appointments,
or have eight coups d'etats in Western Africa the last.
Right, yeah, exactly. You get revolutions, you get explicit revolutions, you could kill people. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can go on this to actually get the kind of radical breaks that are necessary for innovation to happen. I mean, in all fairness to Patrick, you don't actually have to kill people. People don't actually have to die for this, but very often death is helpful. And the Max Planck principle, which you cite when talking about Fukuyama in your book, right? I mean, and this is something Thomas Kuhn believed in too, right? That the new paradigm is always championed by the new generation, right? Because the new generation isn't as heavily invested in the old paradigm, right? So the old generation has too much invested in the old way of doing things, so they're not motivated to go from Newton to Einstein. But if you're just starting out now and you're sort of ambitious, the new thing might be the way to go. And so that's where you get a kind of bandwagon effect on from the younger generation. This is Planck's point, right? It's contested. I mean, but there is evidence that it does sometimes actually work that way.
So I agree that progress may be slower, possibly under life extension. But
okay, so you grant that.
Yeah, I mean, because of the reasons, the sociology of it, you become invested and entrenched, and you get rewarded for continuing the same track. I mean, there are a lot of scientists who just continue because this is how they get funding, because they're in a paradigm that attracts funding, even if they stop believing in it, but it's too late for them to change track and so on. So, no, I do. So my argument, it's a little bit like two issues here. One issue is, would I prefer a society where I can expect a longer, healthier life, and also my parents and my friends and all people who want it, and then have the problem that in certain sectors, more so in some countries than other countries, depending on the systems, we might have slower progress? And I would say, yes, I would. Because what is progress? I would say, if there's any progress I want, then it's to be healthy and for my parents to be healthy and for people, good people, to be healthy and live long lives. I mean, I see that as you can't say, well, there's progress and then that's this thing with extending people's healthy life. I mean, if there's anything that's good progress, well, it would be that. And then the other dimension is to point out that the slowdown might not be as aggressive as you might fear.
I mean, this is interesting. I think this is quite interesting. I mean, this is a very interesting kind of response he's given, because I think, given the kind of general transhumanist mentality, everybody kind of imagines that, extended longevity is associated with accelerationism and all the other things that transhumanism stands for. But this is a very interesting kind of argument, and it could plug in, I think, perhaps into a kind of sustainability argument, right? Because one of the arguments against fast progress of the sort capitalism normally brings, right, is this rapid succession of stuff, right, which is all very destabilizing, creative destruction and all that jazz, right, which ends up actually being destructive not only in terms of people's psychology, but also the physical environment. And so if we have, if the argument for longevity is to slow things down, that might actually be a kind of, as it were, a sustainability argument. right? I mean, so it could be feeding into that, and that would be quite unique from the standpoint of the way in which longevity is normally pitched within transhumanism. I
Yeah,
didn't think
yeah.
about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's paradoxical. And also, I think it's a retreat of sorts because when we say slow down, that's a euphemism for some very bad things. Like, for example, a slowdown in innovation because Amazon is a monopoly, a slowdown in innovation because Google is a monopoly. Okay, so there's a cost, and that cost is not
But
trivial, right? That
again,
cost.
at the risk of coming to Patrick's defense here, I think
Yeah,
I
sure.
think one needs to think about. I mean, the issue of intellectual property law and the transmission of wealth across generations and how corporations are able to amalgamate wealth and all that kind of legal stuff. It seems to me is a separate issue at the end of the day. You could change those laws right now, right? And where there's a sense in which longevity could exacerbate the problem's already here, right? Without people living 150 years.
Exactly. Yeah, it's gonna get worse, right? And the question
Well,
is,
I mean, the point is the problem can be addressed now. It's not a unique problem with his view, actually. I don't think so.
it's not unique. So I'm not saying it's a unique problem. I'm just saying that the problem, the reason why I'm actually interested very much in this issue is because it sort of brings into bold outlines the current biggest problem that I see currently, which is at least in the U.S. and everywhere else, in fact, which is concentration of power has consequences that are bad. And if they are bad today, when I say bad, I mean real bad, meaning people, like for example, in what's the latest coup? Gambia, right? Gambia is extremely rich. They should
You mean Gabon?
Gabon is Gabon. Yeah, Gabon. Gabon is which one is the latest coup? Gabon? Yes, Gabon.
Gabon, yeah,
Yeah, Gambia. I
West
don't know why I say
Africa.
Gambia.
Yeah.
Gabon, right? And
Mhm.
you have like 3 million people, 3 million or 2.5 or something like that. Very rich, and yet extremely poor. Why? Because the wealth was in the hand of a few, right? And then you see the same thing in the United States. What are the consequences of this concentration of power? Well, the consequences are this right now. This the right wingers, let's call them, right, are revolting in the system, and you see this near civil war in the United States because the problem continues to be unaddressed. And why is it unaddressed? Because the powerful are living their own bubble, and unless they get rankled big time by somebody like Trump, they're not going to move a dime, right? So therefore, when we say, okay, things will take care of
But
themselves,
this has nothing to do with life expectancy. This has not. I mean, this may have something to do with the intergenerational transmission of wealth, right, and inheritance laws and stuff like that. But I don't think it has anything to do with longevity per se.
well, it
Can,
has to
can I
do.
can I make a point?
Yeah,
Let me
go ahead.
let me just so that so that the audience sees that I am not coming here from or being incoherent. The reason why, right, I'm picking this topic is because if we today are suffering from folks who hold on to power politically for into their 80s and 90s, what will happen when they are when we have that become even more extreme when they're in their 120
Have term limits.
right?
I mean, there are a lot of things you can do right now that don't
Okay.
require, I mean, that in a sense are independent of longevity and address the system as it already is, because the problem is the way the system is that actually allows terms to go on indefinitely. The
Yeah.
only term limits there are is for the president in the United States. Everything else you can do it forever.
Exactly. And who is going to pass laws about term limits is the people who are in power. We have been talking about term limits since the 70s, right? About term limits,
Well,
I mean,
even before that,
even
yeah.
before that, right? So my point is, I have this I have this sort of discomfort with this kicking the can down that the long termisms, like people who are in transhumanism, things will resolve themselves. We will pass term limits. We will do X. We will do Y. When will we do those? If people who are in power are the ones who are going to determine whether we will filibuster the thing or not, or we will put it in the in the floor or not, a year in year out, right? It's not going to happen. The question to me, the point here, what I want to get out of this conversation is, can you, Patrick, since you are the one who's pushing for for this, and I'm with you, can you give me like a something that tells me that you have thought about this in concrete ways, so we can start having a plan toward solving the problem? Because telling me that it will resolve itself, that we will have more stability, less disruption, blah blah blah, right, doesn't calm me down. Tell me why would things change given that the people who are in power it's not in their interest to get rid of power. Power loves to have more power until the guy stops and freezes McConnell twice and is not able to say a thing, until people say, okay, well, I think now we're getting into elder abuse, guys. Let's get this guy out of here, right? Until we get to that point, the guy won't budge. Dianne Feinstein falling apart. She said, I was here 2 months ago when she was out for a year, right?
Yeah.
So my point, really, Patrick, I'm going to again give you the floor so that you can at least calm me down, because I'm not calmed down right now, right? What is the concrete path? Please avoid any generalities or anything that has to do. I have faith in human beings, and we will figure out a way.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.